Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 7 of season 5. Sam and I had a recent discussion around vulnerability management, a process of finding, prioritizing, and fixing security weaknesses in your organization. Here are a few things we covered. What are vulnerabilities? Why should you be monitoring and resolving them? How can Microsoft solutions help? And what licenses do you need?
We've noticed a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good, thank you. Any news this week from the world of Azure that you want to share?
Again, I've been pretty busy this week, but I think we know about Microsoft Secure happening on the 13th or 14th of March.
Yep.
So second, I think it's the second one ever as it's sort of a new virtual event.
We should probably do a wrap up of that, I would have thought. I assume it's going to be a very AI heavy um, episode, is my guess.
Yeah, well, it's on when I'm in Seattle, so it's gonna be interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you're going to have to, I don't know, catch
Maybe
up
they're live
afterwards, I
streaming
suppose.
it. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe. Yeah. It was interesting. I saw there was a learn pathway for Security Copilot that's been published.
hmm
Did you see that? I haven't actually checked it out. Have you had a look at it?
No, I haven't had a look yet.
No. I just thought it was interesting that we've got a learn pathway before we've got a pricing and a GA date. I think that says it all. I think really about the, you know, the push of the product. But it'd be really interesting to see what sort of news comes out of Secure, because obviously we've got Security Copilot, which is on its way to us. Don't know. Have you got any other things that you're sort of thinking is going to be released then? Or do you think it's just going to be a recap? Because last time I don't think it was too much new product there, was there? It was more recap, if I remember rightly.
It was when Security Copilot was announced the
Is
first
that
time,
right?
so
Yeah?
it was
Okay.
yeah. It's when it was first announced, first sort of highlighted, I suppose, and then Ignite brought it a bit more close
Yes, true. Yeah.
to the to reality, I guess. Um, but yeah, no, I can't think of anything that's coming up. There's a few things in the preview community that will probably be released, then either into public preview or general availability (GA). So, but yeah, what about you, Sam? Have you heard any other news around Azure? That's yeah.
No, not really. Since our last sort of update, obviously we'll probably be due a news. We just have a look at the calendar. Actually, no news will be not next episode, the episode after. Um, yeah, because we're sort of flying through the month now, aren't we? Right, we're getting towards the end of February, so yeah, we're already at what is this episode 7, isn't it? Of season 5. It's yeah. Again, we say it every single time. It just goes so quickly, doesn't it?
Can I say normally this would be like a third of the way through season
Yeah, exactly.
in our old way of doing 20 episodes a season sort of thing. But
Just forge on, Alan. Right, what are we talking about this week?
yeah, so we're going to dive into vulnerability management. We've kind of talked previously in other episodes about um, some of the technology that Microsoft has and that it helps with vulnerability management. I don't think we've ever sort of talked overall and then sort of brought them all together. So I think that's the idea.
Okay, let's start from the top then, shall we? To what are vulnerabilities and why should we, be concerned about them?
So vulnerabilities are weaknesses. I think the best way to say it kind of you know um, weaknesses that are within your organization. generally, and that's probably a generalized term for it, but the context I'm using is within your within your software, within your hardware, within your I guess you could also say your configuration. So vulnerabilities are sometimes, like I said, configuration, but also within the sort of, I guess, the world, we have something called CVEs. And don't quote me what CVE means. I can't remember off the top of my head. But in effect, when a vulnerability is found within some software, and it's been reported, then a CVE is created for it, with the type of weakness that's within the software, what it could be used for, so like remote code execution, things like that. Um, and then what version of software, or BIOS, etc., that it's at, and then I guess how you can then track. It's a way to then track that within your organization, and it's important to sort of keep track of this, because it might be that maybe you have a lengthy patch process with core critical systems, and one of these vulnerabilities might come out that puts you at risk of being compromised. It might open a back door. We've seen it, be on um, firewalls, VPN solutions, where people can then create connections, get into your network that way, or grab credentials from the systems. And then if you're not patching your environment regularly, then you're sort of exposed to that risk. Some of the really big vulnerabilities we've seen is things like the biggest one that I've had to sort of be involved in was things like the SolarWinds CVE, when they had a supply chain attack. There's a lot of organizations that use SolarWinds to monitor their networking and things like that, and it was potentially able to do some remote code execution because it's on all the machines to monitor. So, that was quite a key one that I've had to deal with in the past to track, make sure everything's up to date, and make sure an organization isn't compromised anymore. Well, not compromised, but vulnerable to the CVE. So it's very generally, it's hard to you need software to be monitoring it. It's very difficult to not have that, because it could be 1, 2, 3 people's time um, to look, to check vulnerability lists that are out there, or big announcements. It could be they may have to be checking, make sure everything is up to date, checking what versions they're on. It's almost like asset. You need software asset and things like that. So I think that's sort of it, quite high level, I guess. And yeah, you definitely need to be sort of tracking it at least, um, and trying to keep make sure you just reducing your exposure to risk at that point.
So you're saying this is a sort of a constant challenge for organizations? I assume, with how much software that organizations use on their, if we just talk about software,
Mhm.
vulnerabilities as an example. Like you say, there's can be a configuration of firmware, but let's just focus on software for the moment, right? I don't know what the average inventory size is of software on an endpoint in an organization, but I bet you it must be tens, if not hundreds, of applications, right? To me, this must be just an ongoing sort of whack-a-mole situation of, you know, um, having vulnerabilities exposed publicly, you tracking them down, and constantly patching your machines. Um, do you really need to do it manually? Do you not have things like Windows Update that sort of covers you for these types of things?
Yeah, so it's you're right. It is a bit of sort of like you said, whack a mole kind of thing to it. And I've been in situations, kind of like you said, once something's being announced, you've got the software, it's on all of your endpoints. You've got to then rapidly patch it, and it could be Windows updates at the same time. It could be Windows vulnerability. But as much as we'd like everything to sort of patch instantly, it's not always that easy. So having to track that, have to understand what is remediated, what isn't, understanding how much of your environment is at risk. Because bear in mind, you might be, you know, amazing at patching, and maybe patch Tuesday, the next day it's all done, sort of thing. Um, I mean, I'd like to see an organisation that might do that, because it's not that easy. But you know, uh, without being able to understand how much risk you've got, or to sign it off, because you're going to have your security team saying this needs patching now. Tell me how exposed we are, sort of thing. Do we need to start locking down stuff? But yes, you can do some of that automatically. Um, it's There's various sort of tools out there that are vulnerability scanners and things like that. But it's not just it's a key part of it is monitoring it, or understanding what where your software is on versioning and things like that, and that sort of I guess software asset register, to understand what versions are out there, so you can track if you're vulnerable and things like that. So there are tools for doing that, but then there's tools that also help with the vulnerability and understanding this version of software has this many vulnerabilities in it.
Okay, so it is it seems like a staple of modern IT, I suppose, and the responsibility of organizations to keep on top of it. It seems like quite a complex situation, really. On the surface, it's seems relatively simple, I suppose. It's like just keep everything up to date. But I suppose when you've got potentially hundreds or thousands of endpoints with a software catalog of hundreds of different pieces of software, and they're updated very differently, then tracking that is not a manual job anymore at that point, right?
Yeah, and you might not be able to update software because you might need to go through a testing process. There might be a major, maybe you're on a minor version, there's a major version upgrade, and you have to go to that to be patched against this vulnerability. You might not be able to do that because your software relies on it. I mean, take older versions of Java runtimes. Some of those have got some quite um, some mm, some vulnerability. Well, they have vulnerabilities in them that are patched in newer versions, but your software only runs on that lower version. So you need to track where that risk is.
Yeah, yeah, like you say, it's not just security related patching. You've also got functionality related patching in there as
Mm.
well. Deprecations. That you've got to deal with. I suppose. Yeah. No, it seems complicated. Um. Okay. So what solution is in place from Microsoft to sort of help with vulnerabilities in the organization?
So there is it kind of it's a mix of quite a lot of products for around vulnerability. It did kind of start in one place, which was Defender for Endpoint. Because I think when the Plan 2 side of things, that came with vulnerability management sort of early doors. Um, Kind of start your monitoring of your endpoints. Um, but you've got Defender for Endpoint. Microsoft then brought out some additional functionality in that space around Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management as an add-on to enhance that capability. Um, you've then got some of the new capability in things like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, the Cloud Security Posture Management (CSPM). So some of the protective workloads around that, like especially in Defender for Server, um, you was able to then use Defender for Endpoint to do your vulnerability checking, or you could use sort of bring your own license, or a lightweight version of the license for Qualys. which is another sort of vulnerability management solution. Um, so across those sort of couple of products, there you do get sort of sight of everything. As well, again, kind of tied to Defender for Endpoint because it's kind of started there really, because your endpoints are the most vulnerable places. That's where your users are sort of surfing the internet, etc., and exposing themselves. Is They had some other capability around enterprise IoT on your network as well. So I think that's kind of sort of the key areas, or the key products at least that sort of help you with that today. With there be, like I said, there's configuration. If we talk about configuration and things like that, then Defender Cloud CSPM helps with that to reduce your risk there around vulnerable sort of configuration.
So, you, to me, you're saying that there's not just one tool that can sort of cover your whole organization. Is that fair to say? Because you've got different types of environments, different types of devices, different types of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it depends on the key areas. I mean, Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Server sort of scenarios, that is a key area because, like I said, that's where your applications are. And again, when we dive in, if we dive into it in a bit, there's other capability there to look at other hardware that's on the network. But really, in the Defender Vulnerability Management, just is an enhancement to it, or um, a slightly different license around it to help if you don't have full Defender for Endpoint Plan 2. So it's kind of like the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management is kind of the sort of main product, I guess, around vulnerability management for your endpoints. But if you've got Defender for Endpoint already, Plan 2, then you can have an add-on to it to sort of add the enhancements that you get in MDVM. So it is over a couple of products, and of course, I thinking about it now, I didn't even include things like Defender for IoT that's looking at your OT environment and the vulnerabilities that might be in there. So it is a wider product. So I think that's kind of the the good thing is that you've got technology out there that you may already be consuming, like Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 for your EDR, XDR sort of capability, and as part of that, you've got baked into the solution, vulnerability management.
Should we go through sort of each one of those products and sort of just deep dive in on them just a little bit more about sort of what area each one is sort of focused on and what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so let's go into sort of Defender for Cloud first, and um, this kind of ties into Defender for Endpoint, but if you've got Defender for Server Plan 2 in there as the protective workload, and you've got the Defender CSPM side of it. So I don't know if you need a combination or you can use them individually. I still need to work that out. But as part of that, one of them you get Defender for Endpoint, and with the Plan 2 you get the add-on as well, the vulnerability management for your servers. But one of the key parts is within your Azure, AWS, and GCP environments. Microsoft have recently released in preview, I think it is. No, that's antivirus scanning, but the vulnerability scanning is now agentless, so that it's able to take snapshots of your disk and then scan it offline. So your barrier to getting Defender endpoint deployed on it is gone. So security teams can in effect do vulnerability scanning without deploying an agent, which I think is quite powerful to get a quick sort of to get quick results really without having to go through the process of deployment. Yes, you probably will want to deploy Defender for Endpoint on those endpoints and servers, but that's not necessarily a quick task.
Yeah,
So
because
go on.
if you have an agentless scan of vulnerability management, I assume that inventory you could, I don't know, update it once a day, right? I don't know how. I suppose unless you're patching, and I don't really know what a patching schedule would be like on like a server, for an example, right? You might not patch, have automatic patching all the time, right? So
Hmm.
actually, like you say, having a snapshot of the disk and then running a scan to look for vulnerabilities in another sort of asynchronous and disconnected process means that you don't have any configuration changes to your server. So, application teams, infrastructure teams, people that look after the machines themselves will have less concerns because there's less risk there. There's no actual changes to the machines to get your solution onboarded to it. And also, there's no performance impact, I assume, except for
Yeah.
taking the snapshot of the disk. But that is just that's part of Azure anyway, isn't
Hmm.
it? Right? Just part
Yeah.
of like normal process. So that seems like a really efficient way to get access to those machines.
Yeah. Exactly. And there might be, like you said, concerns about having AV on um, operating systems because it's. Uh, I mean, there was obviously an argument around that, but we definitely see it around Linux side of things that some of the AVs, Defender and other AVs out there, take a lot of resources on Linux potentially, or they're not, because they've not been sized to support, an AV solution scanning. Then, then they're not scanned, they're not monitored. You don't know what's happening on them, sort of thing. So, like you said, agent scanning just removes that barrier and just allows you to at least see it because the data still goes into, I believe, into Defender for Endpoint vulnerability management, so you can see it all with the other um, resources there. So, and also um, in Defender for Cloud as well itself. So yeah, I think it's really powerful, and like I sort of said earlier as well, which isn't really related to Defender for isn't related to vulnerability management, but they've also done agentless scanning where they scan the disk for malware as well. So
Nice.
probably
Yeah,
using
that's
the same
great.
technology, but just different scope. So
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, really good. What about
Um,
Defender for Endpoint?
yeah, so Defend for Endpoint is the heart of it, I think, and there's so much in here. So if you've got Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 or Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management full license, um, you in effect anything that you enable the Sense agent on, or so you enable the Defender for Endpoint part, it then continuously scans the endpoint because it's collecting all the data anyway, because it's part of the EDR sort of solution side of things. Um, and then that will collect your software inventory and all of your software versions, and then what vulnerabilities are in it, and then you get a list of CVEs in there. Um, and a question I always get is how often does it scan? Well, it doesn't really scan because it's just collecting all the data anyway. So it will see the change in software version because it's happening on the device. So it's not necessarily a scan itself; it's just collected as part of that Defender for Endpoint service, and then it's only when the portal update, maybe every 24 hours with the data um, up there. So you can really easily see how many devices have got vulnerabilities and what software, and that kind of so that's just like so we'll say Windows, Linux, Mac, and servers. Okay, that's that part, and then the other part is for Defender Endpoint because it supports Android and iOS. Is it also tell you the vulnerabilities in the operating system and the applications that are there, which is which is great. It's obviously a bit more difficult with Android, with the amount of versions and how often they get patched based on the manufacturer. But at the same time, like I was kind of saying, you're understanding where your risk is within your organization and monitoring it at that point. So that's really good to sort of see that visibility and see that there's maybe a large CV on a certain type of device that you maybe have in your organization, and it's an older version of phone maybe, and you need to replace it maybe because it's too much of a risk to keep it. So that's doing iOS and Android, and then the next part is that you've got scanning of network scanning of your switches. So using SNMP to scan your switches, your routers, your firewalls, and things like that, to collect data off them, see what version they are, and then monitoring those assets as well to see whether there's a vulnerability in the software that needs patching. So within one product, you're now talking about your end users, your servers, your phones. Now we're talking about switches, routers, firewalls, things that support SNMP, and that's great as well. And it can use the scanner is just installed on a Defender for Endpoint, Defender for endpoint, to do that scanning, and that could be sat in the server, the data center where it is, or in the office on a machine that's always on. Maybe it's the boardroom, PC that's always on to do that scanning. So that's that's good as well. And then in the last sort of year or so, they've added enterprise IoT capability. So this is scanning your network, your endpoint scanning your network, or having a passive scanner. But then it's able to then query your IoT devices like your Xbox 360. It's probably too old now, isn't it? But the latest Xbox, your PlayStation 5s, your TVs, your Chromecast, your Apple TVs, etc. They're all on the network, and printers, and it's able to then, if the data is provided by those endpoints about their version of software, can then tell you if there's vulnerabilities in that and whether they need patching and things like that. So now you've covered, what have we covered? We've covered endpoints, servers, mobiles, network equipment, and now IoT devices, just in one product that you get pretty much out of the box from MDE with a bit of config. It's just such a
And
massive. It's just such a
if you
massive.
break those endpoints down as well, you got Windows, Mac, and Linux, right? So
Mac, yeah,
yeah, so it is pretty. I suppose the platform coverage is pretty insane there for MDE, right?
yeah, and they're always adding more functionality in there. Because I mean, we did an episode a couple of weeks ago, I think, on Defend for Endpoint, and I don't know if I went into the phone stuff actually, but anyway. So yeah, it's just there's just so much information in there, and when you got the information, you can see your risk. It gives you your exposure score. So the higher the number out of 100, the more exposed you are. It tells you whether when there's a new active a campaign to use that some bad actors are using to exploit a certain CVE. It will tell you whether you're patched to mitigate against it, or if you've got endpoints vulnerable, or it will tell you if because it's collecting all the data whether that type of attack is actually being attempted on your environment because of that CVE. So it's just insane, really, how much information you get. And it is a lot of there's a lot of stuff in there. What you need to patch, why you need to patch it. Links to the CVEs themselves and things like that. And then it's got a tool, or a part of it now is you've got remediation. So it doesn't necessarily remediate automatically, but you can specify, I need to patch Adobe. So you can say I need to remediate that, and then it will create you a task in Defender for Endpoint vulnerability management sort of section, and then you can track. Say you've got like 30 machines that need patching, it will show you at percentage of which ones, how much has been patched. And today you can then either create a service ticket within ServiceNow, or you can create a administration task in Intune. So if you've got two teams, so you've got the security team and your endpoint, management team, the security team can send a task to Intune, and there's a section for administrative tasks, and it will tell them that they need to patch it from this version to the latest one. So then they know they've got to create the package to then deploy it out. So that's really powerful as well, especially if you've got you're a large organization, you've got multiple teams that can't see specific data there.
So it's coordinating well, it's not just doing vulnerability management, but for this conversation it is, right. It's coordinating vulnerability management, well, sorry, vulnerability discovery,
Hmm.
software inventory for all of these various different platforms, anywhere from endpoints to phones to networking equipment to IoT equipment, OT equipment, right. um and then it's sending all that information to one singular place, which allows you to sort of manage and coordinate that sort of approach to to patching and remediating that. Because I think that's probably pretty key, is if you're somebody in an organization where it's your responsibility to make sure that you reduce as much vulnerability risk as possible, that you have all the information in front of you, right. You know I don't know, let's say CVE's been classified as a high risk. In your scenario, it may be lower risk to you, or it might be a risk that you have to accept because of some sort of incompatibility with a version, or X, Y, or Z, right? So it's probably not just cut and dry. Oh, I see a vulnerability, I must patch it immediately. There's probably a process that you've got to go through: identification, understanding, and then implementation, right? So yeah, it seems really great that it's just this all in one sort of solution to so many different platforms.
Yeah, and the patching. So there's no sort of auto patching within the sort of the Microsoft vulnerability sort of environment. You can you can build there is APIs to access the data, so you could build some automation in there to create packages for you into Intune and things like that. Um, but probably to sort of call out that as part of the sort of new stuff that's in the Intune suite, to help with that sort of automatic sort of patching. It's not necessarily automating it, but there's a new feature coming out that's around package management or application management, sort of more enhanced one than what's already there. And that allows you to, in effect, say, "There's an update for this package. Do you want me to create you the next package?" So they are within Intune building that mechanism to make it easy to create the update packages to increase I suppose the mean time to resolution or mean time to patching kind of thing there.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And was the other area Microsoft Defender vulnerability management, sort of an add-on on top of Defender for
Y-
Endpoint?
Yeah, so this is quite interesting. So yes, so that if you got like I said, plan two. you can have this as like an add-on because you get a lot of the sort of quite a lot of the capability already. But if you don't have Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, you can add on MDVM sort of full license. There's like a full license and an add-on license um, to give you what you get in MDE without the EDR capability, and then the extra stuff. So some of the extra stuff, and we did talk about this in a previous episode when it first came out, but you can do things like baseline assessments, so you can help with hardening your environment. So that's going against the CIS baseline, things like that, which is really good to sort of have. But one of the other areas is that it brings in, it allows you to now see, once it's enabled, your 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 browser extensions and how risky they might be, what permissions they have, which you might not be able to see because we might be able to see what version of Edge or Chrome you have, but we probably can't see those extensions um, that are plugged into it. So you can now see that information, and then you can determine whether they're risky or not, and then maybe update your policies to restrict which ones you're allowed to use. Another part to it is that you can see your the certificates on the endpoints, so that you can see ones that have expired, rogue certificates, things like that on there. I mean, we had a customer say that was quite useful, not necessarily for sort of vulnerability management, but from an operational perspective, that they could actually find out where their wildcard certificate is, so they know where to go and update it, kind of thing, which was quite interesting. Didn't think about using it that way. And then from a discovery perspective, then they now, as another sort of final section, is that they've got it's now able to look at BIOS and firmware of your endpoints. So it will tell you that you've got a vulnerability in your Dell BIOS or your Lenovo BIOS. Um, so you can see from that level as well whether there's a UEFI or TPM issue that needs patching. So now you're not just going down to software install, you're now going down to hardware and firmware, which I think is key as well, because that's definitely difficult to patch sometimes because it's taking the machine out potentially.
Yeah, especially if it's like BIOS firmware versions of different, if you've got multi vendors as well, right?
Mm,
And multi, because lots of organizations have many different types of devices. Change providers over years, different rolling stocks of laptops, endpoints, servers, etc. Right, keeping on top of all the latest like BIOS revisions for all the different SKUs of laptop you have in your organization. Right? You could have
yeah,
20 different laptops in your organization, right?
and and some of those updates you need to go. It's not like you said, it's clear cut to go and patch them, because it might be that it's doing a patch to the TPM, which means that BitLocker goes into recovery because it's been changed, and then users have to go through recovery. It might be quite a not it might need required patching because of the vulnerabilities, but it could be user impacting quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So that's kind of that bit, but there is some. I did say there wasn't any remediation, but there is some prevention as well in the MDVM sort of add-on, and that is um, that if you've got a vulnerable application, you can tell the solution, the vulnerability part of MDE and this add-on to block the application until it gets patched, which I think was very interesting. So if you've got users that aren't patching out there, you say to them, you need to do patch Adobe or whatever software it might be, Zoom, um, then you need to patch it, and you keep telling them, and a week later, 2 weeks later, they haven't done it. You can just block the application until they do it. No, so it can be a bit of a you can force that part, but if you have got a really high vulnerability, high risk one, then you can just block that application until it gets patched to just prevent your risk.
Yeah.
So
So
I
even
think
even
that's
even if the application's there, it can't be exploited because it's prevented from being executed, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, yeah, amazing.
Which obviously is risky to the well, not risky to the user, but disruptive to the user, but stops that vulnerability ever taking place, especially if it's like quite easy to exploit.
Yeah, and it would probably mean that 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 patching is prioritized, or because if there is actually a disruption at that point, you're probably going to get a ticket about that pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, and like I said, the so that's kind of it for those kind of areas, like quick sort of talk about that. But it does prioritize as well which ones you should be doing first, but which was the riskiest and things like that.
Yeah, no, but that's what you want, right? Because I assume in organizations there can be quite a mound of just whack-a-moling, right? So you need to know which ones to sort of hit first.
Yeah, and probably the only other product, the other one was like when I briefly said about Defender for IoT. It's a different in the OT side of things. It's different, but there is threat intelligence that gets pushed down to those sensors to tell you if there's high risk vulnerabilities in your OT environment. Slightly different sort of view of the world, but because it's an environment that you don't really ever patch if it's working and things like that. So it's just
Yeah,
worth understanding your risk there.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. Cool, Alan. Any other product areas that you want to cover?
No, not that I can think off the top of my head. I mean, like I said, CSPM does some of that agent stuff, MDE and things like that. I can't think anything else on top of my head. The licensing, I guess we kind of talked about. It's Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, or
Yeah,
this Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management SKU, and maybe the Enterprise IoT SKU as well. If you don't have is it M365E3
5.
plus E5 security, I think, isn't it? You get it.
Is it full E5?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. I
No,
thought it
neither
was
can I.
I thought it was E5 secure as long as you had E5 security.
That would make sense.
Um, yeah, and Defender for cloud is consumption based and subscription based, and Defender for IT is based on site and how many devices you're detecting and protecting on those OT environments. So relatively simple. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, the that add-on. Um, I don't know what it is in USD, but in GBP, um, the add-on is something like £1 62 per user per month, and I think the full version, if you don't have MD, is £2 60 or £2 70, something like that, off the top of my head when I last looked. So it doesn't seem to me, it doesn't seem like a. I mean, it depends on how many users you have, of course, but for the amount of value you get and be able to show that you're doing vulnerability management, maybe to your site, cyber insurance or something. I think it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's hard for me to know what else is out there, you know, outside of Microsoft, right? What other people are offering, and how that sort of compares. But we do see a large number of organizations bundling in a lot of security solution with their productivity license, right? If
Hmm.
you're on a well, if you're on sort of any combination of E3, E5, etc., um, you get sort of bundled savings, don't you? Really, of your solutions. Yeah, okay. Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management is an add-on. Defender for Cloud CSPM is extra capability, and it's cloud focused, so it's kind of separate, really, to the normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is a bit different because if you had servers, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But my the point being is that you can get a lot of value bundled in with your productivity license, right? Or with an extra cost in on top, and it's like somebody's like it's people's jobs to actually work out like the licensing, optimization of all of these SKUs and various different things that organizations should have. So you can be creative in what you do and don't have. If you did have your own EDR solution and you didn't need, you know, um, EDR from MDE, you could license this via using the same agents, right? But you could just
Hmm.
use it for vulnerability management if that's something that you wanted to do. So I would call out the flexibility there
Yeah.
to just highlight specific solutions and workloads that you need, which you may pay more for because it's unbundled and you're adding stacking on top of things, but it is possible to just, single out this technology.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of, that we're seeing a lot of customers starting to use. I mean, a lot of customers got MDE, see the value in the vulnerability management side of it. And then, we've been doing some recent workshops, around the MDVM capability, and it's just, the amount of sort of interest in it now because of the extras, that sort of extra capability that you get there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, Alan, anything else you want to cover, or should we wrap it up there?
And I think that's it. It's just probably some call outs on other episodes. So, season 4, episode 13, we did Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management when it came out. Um, I think we got season 5, episode 4. So, a couple of weeks ago, like I said, we got Defender for Endpoint generally. Um, and then last season, season 4, episode 4, we've got an episode on Defender for Cloud CSPM capability. But it probably won't have the vulnerability scanning agentless part in it because it wasn't out then. But or maybe it was. I can't remember. It is a recent thing. So, but yeah. Um, okay, Sam. What about next week's episode?
I'm going to cover Azure Event Grid. So it's I would say it's relatively niche. I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know a huge amount of people that use it in production or generally know about it. So I just sort of wanted to highlight Event Grid because there is some really cool functionality there. But effectively, it's a scalable and fully managed pub sub messaging distribution service, um, and it uses uh, pub sort of popular consumption patterns, and it is highly integrated with Azure itself. So it's definitely worth knowing about if you are building solutions in Azure because it can be really handy to help to trigger certain conditions. Um, using this type of messaging protocol, but without having to manage it yourself, which I think is always a good thing.
Cool. Okay, that sounds interesting. Um, okay, so did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify. This really helps us reach more people like yourselves. If you do have any specific feedback or suggestions, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.